Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, May 17th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we will discuss another ejection due to foreign substances. Domingo Germán tossed from a game on Tuesday. We'll talk about some of my reasoning for the anti-model LODEM approach. I'll explain it. It's not just a harebrained thing that I said in passing. There's actually some reason to consider looking at things that way. We're also going to talk about a few surprising pitchers who have really popped in terms of earned value so far. A bunch of mailbag questions to get to, a variety of topics covered there, but a lot of good questions. So I want to make sure we loaded up the rundown with those today. So midweek mailbag instead of Monday mailbag this week. Let's start with Domingo Germán. An automatic 10-game suspension is coming. He had a check a few starts ago against the Twins and wasn't ejected, much to the chagrin of Twins manager Rocco Baldelli. I was watching Twins-Dodgers last night when they started talking about it again, like, hey, what was different? And the only thing that was really different from a situational perspective is where the game was being played. A few weeks ago, it was at Yankee Stadium. Tuesday night, it was on the road in Toronto. But I wanted to ask you, did anything abnormal come up in the game log recently? Anything in terms of spin rates or anything that would be suspicious? If you go back as far as that 11 strikeout performance against Cleveland in April, and everyone's going to have some suspicion that Germán may have had something extra going on this entire time. But are you seeing anything in the numbers that actually supports that?
Not really. In particular, the last start, he was up 50 RPM, and that is just nothing. That is a total nothing burger in terms of like game-to-game variation. One standard deviation of game-to-game variation is 150 RPM. And he wasn't even one standard deviation. Now, one standard deviation, they can say, well, this is a little bit weirder than normal, but that's still not even 2 or 3. Like, 3 is when you'd be like, whoa, that guy went from not doing anything at all to totally cheating. You know what I mean? That's the 3. That's what the definition of sort of the bell curve is. You're going to have this bell curve. Within one standard deviation is the bulk of things. Within 2, you get like 90%, and then the little tails on the end of the bell curve. That's the third standard deviation. And so half of one standard deviation is right in the middle. It's 50 RPM from game to game is completely normal. I think it points to a problem though over a second, which is that what is the baseline? Like when people talk about like, oh, well, let's use RPM or RPM divided by velo, whatever, to spot these cheaters. Like when are they clean? It's like the steroid thing. It's like, when were they clean? What are we comparing to? What's the baseline? There was nothing weird about this season compared to last season in terms of game-to-game variation, except that he was on the higher end of his spin for the year. But in terms of if your baseline is the average for the year, then he was fine. He was within it. If you go back to 2021, the beginning of 2020, or you go back all the way to 2019, there's been an increase, I guess, in terms of his spin rate, in terms of, if you just use a seasonal baseline, he's up. In 2019, he was down to 2440 on the four-seam fastball, and this year he's been around 2530. That's still only 100. It's not even 100,
Right, so, you could make adjustments, legitimate changes.
I did ask a pitching coach about that, because there was this idea at some point that the only way to change your spin rate was with sticky stuff. And I have had a couple pitching coaches say, no, they think there are ways. And there is some more advanced research now going into finger pressure. With Alex Fast has a new way to measure finger pressure on the ball. And so I do think that there are things about finger pressure, cues that you can use, mechanical changes that can affect your spin rate. Even if you used his very bottom of, even if you used the very bottom of his spin rate year to year, sort of his yearly average of the 2019 one. This year is fine. It's within average. And in terms of last year, 25-39 on the fastball, 25-30 this year, 2021, 24-82. None of like the year to year, the baseline for him should be around 2,500. And if you look at his game to game, he was at 25-91 yesterday. So I just don't see, evidence within the spin rates. Now, yeah, they touched him, and they said they were super sticky, but I don't like subjective. And one of the reasons I sort of broke the story is I don't like selective enforcement, and another way of saying selective enforcement is subjective enforcement. Mm-hmm. Am I wrong? I mean, I think subjective and selective, they're not synonyms, but they kind of go hand in hand. Using the hand again, but I don't like this. I don't like leaving this up to how quote unquote sticky the umpire thinks the hand is. So I'm going to try and develop some sort of test for this that's more objective.
Yeah, we need a swab. I think we need a swab of the substance, and we need the substance to return as something that is a banned thing. In this case, for Domingo Germán, they had good tight shots of his uniform where he had little clumps of pine tar, so it was kind of easy to see what was going on in this case. The most likely explanation is that if you look at the entire span of his career, you think about when the sticky stuff crackdown started around this time last year, he's probably been using something the entire time, and the subjective nature of how they check guys, how sticky are your hands, which we can't quantify very effectively, has just made it possible for him to just keep doing what he's always been doing to some degree. The other complicating factor, this came up when the Max Scherzer suspension happened, was that if you use the alcohol substance to clean your hands, you can still have some tackiness left over. I have no idea if that's actually what happened in this instance, but it's another problem that goes into the how sticky are his hands thing, right? Well, maybe he was eating pancakes between innings and, got his hands in the syrup. Like, that's obviously not what happened here either, but there's just all these other little variables that could actually increase the tackiness on a pitcher's hand. So yeah, we do need something better than what we've got right now. And every time we think it's the last time we're going to talk about sticky stuff, we know it's not, because there's always going to be someone else out there pushing something and another ejection, more suspicion coming down the road. That's just the way this works now.
For what it's worth, Germán's spin rates never went down during the first enforcement.
Yeah. So there you go. There's the other side of it too, right? There wasn't a change then.
This points to the when do you start? If you have a baseline, when do you start? So if you go back to enforcement, you say, well, he never went down. Does that mean he never thought what he was doing was cheating, or
did he have a good system the entire time for just having the stuff off his hands by the time they checked it? It's more questions than answers. I'm not going down the conspiracy theory road with sticky stuff at the present time. Just not interested in that.
It's unfortunate, the proximity to the Aaron Judge situation, because
very bad timing.
Just because both of these border closely on nothing burgers, and just to have the two, there's that thing where it's just there's smoke, there's fire, and it just leads to hot takes. And I'm not willing to say the Yankees cheat any more than any other team.
Okay, and there's a few things here. So we haven't talked about
busted right before the Astros doing the sign stealing, but they got busted along with the Red Sox, and ostensibly changed their ways.
And in where there's smoke department, there were other teams that had stuff going on that we didn't find out about, at least didn't have publicly written stories that were widely consumed. But there's a constant effort within Major League Baseball and with all professional sports, I think, to find an edge and to push the boundaries of the rules and to cheat. That is what happens. The stakes are incredibly high. In the case of Judge, for anyone who somehow hasn't heard the story by now, his eyes glanced over to the dugout before a pitch was thrown. Jay Jackson, a kind of fringy reliever, threw him a cement mixer over the heart of the plate, and Judge crushed it out to center field. If the Yankees decoded on the field by either watching the catcher or watching Jay Jackson himself or figuring it out however they can,
Jay
that's
Jackson
legal.
came out with Ken Rosenthal and
said he was tipping.
Said he was tipping. So
if the pitcher's tipping and the other team picks up on it and they tell each other what's going on,
was helping Judge, like was timing it or had figured it out before Judge or whatever. Like
it's still pretty weird, and
like that seems within the rules of seems within what people do in baseball.
Right. So I don't have any outrage about that whole situation. The outrage I would have is if technology was back in the equation. If
they do have a guy for MLB that works for MLB that goes randomly into the dugout and checks. Like they do have a sniffer. They have like a person who walks around. I mean, he looks at the video room and he does unannounced checks. I mean, it doesn't have to be he. Like they do unannounced checks and check in on the video person, and they go down to the dugout and look around. So like there's a person that's looking around for this sort of stuff, and so I think it's mostly out of the game.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not getting all fired up about it. I know a lot of people are, especially if they're Blue Jays fans, Yankees fans. It's a rivalry. It makes the rivalry more intense, I guess.
I don't fault them for asking questions. And even when this stuff is cool on the field, it leads to hit by pitches and brawls, and like people don't like it. I'm not saying, you have to like it. I'm just saying it seems within the boundaries of normal gameplay. And I would say the same of Domingo Germán until I really had better evidence. I think the one thing that I have a problem with the swab is that like a swab for a substance, then you have to have something that, I guess, a swab that turns color, but then it would have to be a test that like could happen on the field right away, and it would have to be for a list of substances, and then you'd have an arms race for a substance that's not on the list. You know what I mean? Like, so my thing is to sort of attack the stickiness and to have some sort of stickiness benchmark where you're like, this is too much stickiness, and I have a test here where I can test your stickiness. And there are some stickiness tests out there, industry stickiness tests that I've discovered on Twitter. Thanks to Twitter. I love it sometimes. I hate it a lot, but I love it sometimes when you're like, oh, like this person knows about like a tackiness test that's like used in printing processes. It's like, whoa, all right, that could be it. That could be the answer.
Tackiness Twitter, the whole column of people I don't have in TweetDeck yet.
Publishing, printing Twitter. What's up?
There is one of the Yankees thing I thought we should talk about. Wandy Peralta is actually getting saves for them right now. This is a 31-year-old kind of journeyman reliever. It seems like it's more of a mix and match thing than a clear Peralta's the guy and he's safely going to record every save opportunity for the Yankees going forward. But this is an unexpected twist within this bullpen because I think at one point it looked like Michael King as their best reliever could end up getting more save opportunities. It also looked like Ron Marinaccio could be a part of the equation. And both of those things could still be true because when you look at Wandy Peralta's skills over the course of his career, he doesn't have an overwhelming strikeout rate. Right now he's at a 23.9%. That is a career best. And he's having trouble with walks, which he's had trouble in the past with 14.1%. So yeah, like, it's just barely good enough to get the job done. And yeah, maybe if they want to use the other guys in more specialist roles, he could end up getting more saves. But this seems like more of a committee at best situation for me, and one where I wouldn't want to, if he wasn't picked up already, I wouldn't want to be too aggressive fab-wise based on what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, I'm not in. When we have looked at anything that has a whiff of predictive quality for role change, it usually has to do with velo, strikeout rate. His velo is not bad, but his strikeout rate is like average for a reliever, 23.9, And then the walk rate is not something that I've necessarily seen proven that it matters in terms of the closer role, but it just seems really intuitive that you do not like to have a closer that walks people. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, they're likely to put the tying run on base.
Not great.
Walking people. And I don't love that. So the combination of putting the guy on base, I guess he is a good sinker baller. He does have the good ground ball rate. He does suppress homers. So the idea is maybe he puts the guy on base and then erases them with a double play. I think Michael King has not been the option because he's still doing multiple innings. I don't know if they're ever going to change that, but he's obviously settled into their multiple innings role. I just want to point out, though, that I think the answer for them is the old answer. And Clay Holmes has kept a clean sheet since the 6th. And that is 6 straight appearances with 0 runs, 1 walk. We've got something like 7 innings over that time. And he's given up 6 hits, no walks, no homers, tons of ground balls. He's my guy. I know there's a little bit of a risk with lefties. But then, even then, Wandy Peralta is not a great platoon guy for him because Wandy Peralta's best pitch might be the changeup. And so it's a little bit weird to like bring in a lefty to maybe get some lefties out with a changeup. So I kind of think Clay Holmes is going to take this job back.
All right. So if we had to break it down, it's Holmes 70 to 80% of the saves maybe, and then scraps and whatnot to Peralta and the others based on the current situation.
That's where I'm going. The one guy that I liked to like maybe just run with it was Ian Hamilton, but he's hurt. And he's not necessarily, I mean, he was working his way towards more high leverage situations, but like Clay Holmes has two holds in his last 2 appearances, and you have to go back to the 8th of May to get a hold for Ian Hamilton. And actual usage is perhaps the most predictive thing for closer changes. It's like who's getting the holds is maybe the easiest way to find a closer.
Yeah, I think that tends to be the order. Everyone seems to move up a chair usually,
right? Yeah, you move up a chair, exactly.
It's not very scientific, but it is somewhat effective.
And Hamilton's, I think, hurt. So,
yeah, I do like Hamilton as more of like a deep keeper dynasty, just extra pitcher on your roster sort of guy, though, just because Clay Holmes, 30 years old, doesn't seem like a guy that's going to have the job for 2 or 3 more years. Just seems like the guy that has the job right now, or the inside track to the bulk of the job for the time being. Let's move on to some surprising pitchers. I used the cutoff of $15. I was looking at the RotoWire earn values for the season because it always in mid-May will turn up some names you don't expect it to. You get guys that have great ratios, tack a few extra wins on that, makes a pretty big difference in something like this.
Yeah, sometimes like the relievers pop, right? Because there's just like some guys who have like a 0.5 ERA and like
like Yennier Cano is a $16 pitcher right now because he's got an ERA of 0 and a .194 WHIP and over a strikeout per inning. He's got a handful of saves, get 3 saves and a win also, but ratios like that will definitely pop. Now, Eduardo Rodriguez, who we talked about earlier this week, is now a $31 pitcher in here. This is a 10-team league. I'm going to switch it to 15-team league. I'm going to use 65% spent on batters if anyone else has the tool open. So $33 if you make those adjustments now for Erod. So that makes him the 3rd starter behind Zach Gallen and Joe Ryan, just the way we all drew it up. A good reminder that a quarter of a season is not a whole season, and any combination of players can be higher or lower on this list than they should be over
and it's like
8 or 9 starts.
It's not like a counting stat where like you can only add dollars, like he can subtract dollars from you pretty quickly.
Right. It'd be really cool to see a visualization of this month by month or week by week, where you could just see guys rising and falling until they get to their eventual spot.
He was worth -$5 over the next month.
Yeah, and I think at some point I'm going to have an exercise on the show where I just take a random season and I show everybody the results by month. And you have to figure out, was this a good season? Was this a bad season? Was this an average season? Because we don't think in terms of, even if you look at weeks of fantasy baseball, when I look at the NFBC and I start picking up players, I always have the weekly tab. When I start looking at the game log, I'm like, how much is he playing? I use weekly for that. How many at-bats is this guy getting on a week-to-week basis? But even when I see, a home run, 2 runs, 2 RBIs, my brain's not really calibrated to go, is that really good? Or is that just kind of what I should be getting from this guy? Or is that even a little bit less? It's the same kind of thing. You're not trained to think about player values on a micro level. And it might be a problem to do it. It might lead you to make more mistakes, but I thought a couple of these pitchers were worth bringing up. So Erod at 33, we talked about earlier in the week. Just thought it was funny he was that high. Mitch Keller at 31 is number 4 right now on this list. Justin Steele, we haven't talked about him much at all this season, is a top 10 pitcher, $28 so far. I didn't see anything I was really excited about with Justin Steele. There were good results in the second half of last season, so there was some proof of concept that he had something that was going to work. He's doing this in the face of a lower strikeout rate. This was a guy that didn't have an amazing strikeout rate to begin with, which is kind of solid, 24.6% last year. Strikeout per inning stuff, it's fine for a starter. But what he's done, he's actually lowered the walk rate. He's pitching to a 2.44 ERA, a 1.03 whip so far. 6 wins, a big part of why he is popping so far. I look at him, I see the K rate down. I have immediate concerns. I also think he's the kind of guy that you wouldn't get a lot for in a trade anyway. So I think the question is, what should you reasonably expect from him going forward? It seems to me there's a very good chance the best quarter of Justin Steele's season has already happened, but what will the next 3 quarters of his season look like?
Yeah. Well, both of these guys are locating the ball well, and they're enough into the season where there's some predictive quality to that location. You can see that even though Steele is striking fewer batters out, he's also walking fewer batters. And that location does show up in things like batting average on balls in play and home runs per 9, although not in a way that you would just say, oh, look, he's got what is it that Rodriguez has? He has like a 209 BABIP, and he's locating the ball well, so he's going to continue doing that. So, like, not in that way. But if you wanted to, like, look through the different projections and say, ATC has him with a 295 BABIP going forward. I like that. He's locating the ball well this year. This is going to be one of his best years when it comes to command and walk rate. And so maybe he's going to also limit the balls in play a little bit and limit the homers. And you take that 295 BABIP from ATC, and you take that 274 walk rate from the bat, and you put it together, and you get something like a 3.8-ish ERA going forward with the around 8 strikeouts per 9. That is going to be useful. And you can do the same game with Steele, where you take the lower walk rates, you take the lower home run rates, you put it all together, and you come up with I would say like a 3.6, 3.8 kind of ERA going forward. So both these guys are going to be useful, but the trick about 3.8 is at 3.8, he's also going to give you some 4.4s and some 4.5s and some 5s, And so what I would just say is, both these guys are keeps. Both these guys are guys you want on your roster, and both these guys are guys I would not start every time out.
Yeah, I think Justin Steele would fit into the new LODEM approach. The anti-model, air quotes, the anti-model approach is not. I'm not the person that's sitting here saying models are useless, projections are useless. I'm the person saying that if everyone in the room is using the model or the projections or both, and they're looking through players the same way, the advantage is to look at them through a different lens. You can still make some catastrophic errors doing this, so you can't just go willy-nilly and have absolutely no reason whatsoever for going after certain players. But, when you look at the Steele projections, the bat has him at 4.54 for the ERA and a 1.41 whip the rest of the way. So this would be the kind of pitcher that is probably easy to trade for, relatively speaking, compared to his performance. If we think he's going to exceed the projection, he's a good target because many people won't believe. Many people will look at the flaw, the limited velo on the fastball, the low strikeout rate so far, and say, I can't be there when this goes wrong. And as long as you can reasonably find something, either the home park, the team context, maybe an ability to avoid hard contact. Maybe that's a skill that Justin Steele actually has. We've seen it in the home run rate going back to last season, right? Home run issues really were never a problem for him in the minors. And other than his first foray into the big leagues back in 2021, he's done that at the big league level too. So there might be something here that models and projections don't necessarily agree with, but they will eventually find and catch up to. So it's picking your spots, right? It's not again, it's not like an anti-science or anti-numbers or anything like that. It's leverage. This game, fantasy baseball, is a game based on leverage and outliers and finding things before other people find them. That's the reasoning behind the LODEM idea and an anti-model sort of approach. I'm still using those tools. I'm just trying to figure out when those tools might be missing something or leading us astray, which is a fine line to walk.
Yeah, you're making an argument against yourself, though.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm totally making an argument against myself. It's like a philosophy class nightmare where I'm like spinning circles over here. It's like, wait, all the things I believe are the things everyone else believes about players. Therefore, what I believe about players is not as helpful as it should be. It's not wrong, but it's not necessarily optimal. That's the hard part.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also not an argument against us. It's in a way like, what we try to do is give you certain ways to look at players. And just even like putting your own shade on that is we would like that. We're not trying to create a robot army of people that just see it the way we see it,
No.
So like, if you think Location Plus, like, Tango went out and Tom Tango went out and he's the chief data architect for baseball, and he didn't find much predictive quality for location, and so he doesn't love it. When we put it into our ERA projections, though, we found usefulness, and even when Baseball Prospectus looked at it, they found usefulness for Location Plus. And so if you just sort this year's leaderboard of pitchers that have thrown 20 innings and do it by Location Plus instead of Stuff Plus, you will be looking at it from a different angle than a lot of people, right? Who will be mostly starting by Stuff Plus. And then there's some interesting names that come to the top because Lance Lynn, 10th in Location Plus among these pitchers. And his game has always been mix around an assorted group of okay fastballs. They're worse this year than ever before, but I don't think I think he can still make it work. I've been out on him, but because I look at that stuff and I think it's at 90 Stuff Plus, he's just too far gone. But Marco Gonzalez, 88 Stuff Plus, 109 Location Plus, third best Location Plus in baseball. Like, there's still some usefulness there, and this is part of why Martin Perez makes it work, despite a 78 Stuff Plus. Bailey Falter at 80 has a unique sort of arm angle and a type of movement that that people don't see that often. A little bit sort of Drew Smiley-esque, So there are different ways to look at what we're doing, and then there's also just sort of reading the tea leaves beyond it. So we've been talking about Alek Thomas. We have breaking news. Alek Thomas has been sent down.
You could tell it was coming. Dominic Fletcher was doing good things with that playing time.
You brought it up with Dominic Fletcher, and sort of mentioned that he might make things difficult for Alek Thomas. I think just yesterday on the cast when we were talking about it. But you can still look at things through the way that we were looking at it, and looking at like, well, this is okay, the strikeout rate's okay, the barrel rate's okay, but also zoom out and say, well, the Diamondbacks are trying to win, and I think that they're gonna play Dominic Fletcher because he's coming up and he's gonna give him a better chance to win tomorrow rather than 2 years from now. So there's all sorts of different ways to kind of parse the different stats that we talk about on our show, the different ways we look at things on the show.
Yeah, it's so hard because the past, I think, gets overrated by some people. Like, oh, it used to be so much better. Players used to be this way. Like, the people do that. Usually they're older folks. Usually you don't have like young people saying the past was amazing because they weren't there.
They still lived at home.
They still lived at home. I think the future can be a little overrated sometimes, right? We look at players' potential in the long run and we dream too much on that. And then somehow the present gets a little bit underrated, like what's happening right now. But what I think is hard about the present is the exact decision that the Diamondbacks were faced with. Dominic Fletcher comes up and he's doing more than Alek Thomas is. You can't, in the face of a player playing that well, go back to the guy that you think is the better long-term player. At least if you do, it's a really hard decision to make. I think it's hard to justify it in the clubhouse when you're trying to win right now. And
the clubhouse dynamics is really interesting. That's why I talk about like the order of young prospects having to come up. Why Matt McClain may have come up before Ellie De La Cruz. You know, like there's clubhouse dynamics where people are like, "No, Matt's been here for years. He deserves it." And well, why is Alek Thomas still up here? He's hitting 195, and we can say, well, we don't think 195 is predictive, you know, but like that might not matter if you're trying to win games. And the other times it's like he's hitting 195, he's hitting 395. Why is that guy starting today?
Well, we can look at a player and look at the core skills and say this is what he should do over a full season, but sometimes they just don't get the full season for reasons out of our control. Injury, demotion, someone else playing better. Like those are all things that you can't always account for. But teams have to make that decision. Just like we have to make decisions in season about what to do. I think this comes up in every league, but I think it's hardest in a 10-team mixed league. I don't play in any 10-team mixed leagues right now. The last time I played in one, I think it was maybe last year, the listener league, it was there 10 or 12 teams.
And that was tough because you had to be like, oh, I got to drop this good player right now.
All the time, you're stuck with this choice between the really good established players you drafted who are in prolonged slumps, the Jose Abreu types. You have to decide on those players, and they're cuts first in a 10-team league before they start getting cut in more like the leagues we play in. And you have to decide, are the young rookies
Alek
that come
Thomas
up.
has been cut in those leagues. Like,
he was never drafted in those leagues.
Yeah.
But then you have to decide on prospects. How long do you wait on prospects to figure it out? Ezekiel Tovar was probably cut 6 weeks ago. After the first week or first 2 weeks, he was probably dropped in those leagues, but that was still a tough drop.
Dynasty where I've been nursing Alek Thomas along on the bench because I'm like, yeah, this is good for the future. And now I'm like, oh, God.
Now he's probably a drop in a 12-team dynasty league.
Terrible. I hope he doesn't become good on someone else's team, though. Grr.
But so here's the reason why I think you're not dropping him because you don't believe in him as a result of the Diamondbacks sending him down. You're dropping him because you need that roster spot to help you right now. And the time it's going to take for Thomas to come back, earn the role you think he's going to earn, and play at the level you need him to play at to be relevant in a 12-team league, that could be 2 years.
You should see my IL in that league. I've got O'Neill, Cruz, Rhys Hoskins. Oh my God, it's so good. It's right here. O'Neill, Cruz, Rhys Hoskins, Tyler O'Neill, and Jacob deGrom, Drew Rasmussen, Brandon Woodruff, Edwin Diaz, and I've already dropped Luis Garcia and Tyler Mahle because I just didn't have enough IL slots. So I think Alek Thomas has just got to go, dude. I got to somehow win today's game, just like the D-backs.
Yeah, I mean, you have to play for the present on some level. Even if you're in a keeper league, even if you're in a dynasty league, you're playing for now sometimes. So you have to think like a team playing for right now. And teams in the middle in baseball, especially this time of year, are really asking those tough questions. Okay, we're not where we want to be, but we're better than we thought, or we're as good as we thought. What's our next move to make us a little better?
We're not ready to sell yet. Like let's put our best team on the field for another month, and if we're still not really in the mix, then we can start bringing Alek Thomas back up or bringing these guys back up.
And that easily describes a half dozen teams, if not more, at this point in time. There was a Lance Lynn question that came in, though, that I thought was relevant since he came up, pitched really well on Tuesday night, which maybe opens the door. If you're in a situation where you were holding and waiting and hoping for a turnaround, you bank this really good start. Maybe it opens the eyes of a few other folks in the league. So there's kind of do you hold him? Do you move him? The question came from Andrew. Andrew said, some are pointing to Lynn's track record, swinging strike rate, K rate, and BABIP, saying the results he's had so far are just bad luck. I pulled these numbers off Fangraphs. It looks like a real skills degradation to me, and there's a reason he's been getting hit harder. Is that how you would see the situation? Also, how much does the Stuff Plus model change from season to season? With the tweaks being made, can it be misleading to compare Stuff numbers between seasons for a single player? And is it just better to use it to compare pitches within the same season? So there was a screenshot of Lynn's Stuff numbers going back to 2020. And Stuff Plus overall, I think, went from 106 to 104 to 97 to 90 this season. So just a progressive decline, which, given his age and what he does, it kind of makes sense that it would track out that way. But
Stuff Plus in particular.
and he mostly throws fastballs. So it's a pretty big hit for a guy like Lynn. So
I tried to look at just the last 2 weeks to see, to capture that good start, and 18 innings in the last 14 days, 85 stuff plus on the fastball, 83 on the sinker, 100 on the cutter. So that's better than he's been doing. And it still does not leap off the page to me. And yes, 111 location plus. So he basically had a couple games where he located the ball really well. That has been part of what he's done in the past. But it's a little bit too Marco Gonzalez-y for me. And yes, I know the strikeout numbers aren't the same, but in terms of like, he's relying too much on command these days. And so even if I think he's going to rebound some, I think he's going to have the worst home run rate of his career. I think he's going to have, one of the worst whips of his career. I mean, he did have a 153 in 2018. It's going to be maybe better than that, but otherwise, I think it's going to be one of his worst years. And going forward, I would just cherry pick the worst projection. 4.58 from the bat, 1.27 whip. 8.9 strikeouts per 9, like that feels about right to me, if I'm kind of trying to wade between all the numbers.
If you look at the rest of season projection for Lynn from the bat, 4.58 ERA, 1.27 whip. That's the worst of the Fangraphs projections. We've mentioned before, the bat has adjusted to the run environment. Some of the projection systems haven't. Justin Steele is 4.54 and 1.41, so worse in the whip. What I think is interesting is that you could very easily, in a league with trades,
for selling Steele for Lynn.
You could trade Steele for Lynn, but you'd also get more back with Lynn, right? So I'm saying more as like how much do you how much faith do you want to put in the projections? Because they should end up at about the same place. You might get a better whip from Lynn based on the projections. You might even get more strikeouts from Lynn. Those strikeouts might be more reliable. So do you go with what the sheet says, knowing you can get a second player back, or if you make it a 2-for-2, that by getting Lynn, you're getting an upgrade in that second spot because you're giving up the guy that looks so much better in the results that have happened so far? I mean, how would you play it?
I'm not doing it.
I feel like I need game show music after a question like that.
I'm not doing it. It's a good one. It's a good idea. I'm not doing it.
It's out there. I want to see if anyone does it. Screenshot it if you pull it off, because I want to know. And then you got to set a reminder for like October 1st to circle back around and be like, hey, my whole season, my whole life turned around after I did that.
You can dance in my face if you got it right.
I don't have a clear answer on that. As far as the model changing from season to season, does that make it a little bit harder? Because you retrained the model. Does that make it harder to make the comparisons, as Andrew asked, or does it retroactively go back and adjust the past seasons based on how it's been retrained so you can make those year-to-year comparisons?
Yeah, anytime
on a fair basis.
Anytime you're looking at numbers on there, whatever the model is, it's consistent across the years.
Yeah, it's retroactively applied, so you don't have to worry about it being different.
If anybody's interested in sort of under the table stuff, I think Christian Javier was something that we were talking about on Twitter today. His stuff plus number is down a lot, even though his ride is only down, on the order of a half inch or so. His velo is down, less than a tick. And his release point is up, on the order of an inch or 2 or 3. So, all these things seem like small. And I think Lance Brodsdowski, who does really good work on Twitter, pointed out that he thinks it's an overcorrection and that the driveline model still has Javier's fastball as a plus. And obviously the results are there. This also feeds into the Yennier Cano thing that we've been talking about. Like, why do people who have really unique skill sets or movement profiles do so poorly in the model? So here are the things that we are considering doing right now. We just had a meeting. Pitching Plus just had a meeting, and the priorities are this: altitude adjusting. That would do a better job of predicting Carlos Estevez away from home. You look now; he has a 120 plus stuff plus. And he in Colorado he didn't. So that's because altitude affects movement. So does weather and pressure. So like that's a big thing where we're not trying to adjust the results as part of it. We're just trying to say, hey, let's create a baseline for movement. Like if you were pitching at sea level, what would everybody's stuff plus look like? You know, just so that it ports better from park to park. And so that's what we're looking at there. One other thing we're looking at is platoon adjusting stuff plus. There, you'll notice that a sweeper has a huge stuff plus and a mediocre pitching plus. That's because it's of the platoon split issue. So that's a known issue. We're thinking about doing that. The third is a little bit wonky, but I think people can hang with me for a second. When a new pitch comes in and it has a unique profile, the model is looking for comps and it doesn't find any. And so it'll look for a nearest comp and just be like, it's like this other poo-poo pitch, so it's poo-poo, you know? But that's not the right answer. And what we can do, Bayesian statistics has this idea that like you can find priors, you can find semi comps, you can find whiffs of comps. You can be like, oh, you know what, Yenir Kno's pitch is not like anybody else's, but it's a little bit like this. Oh, and these types of movements have been good in the past, and this sync is generally and fade is generally good. So let's, even though we can't find a specific comp, we can say the things it's doing are a little bit like things that have been done in the past, a little bit, and so let's give it a little bit of credit for those other things that's a little bit like, you know. And so that's that's somewhat in there due to the mechanics of machine learning, but we want to see if we can increase that ability so that when a new pitch enters the stratosphere, we don't have to wait for a retraining. So I think those three things will improve stuff plus. It's this is another thing that I think is interesting about your anti-model or this model idea, is that my dad has been betting for years, and he always is like, "Oh, I made a tweak to the model," and like, "Oh, it's good, it's going good now." And my first reaction is you don't actually have a model if you're tweaking it all the time. So part of me wants to be like, no, let's just leave stuff plus as it is a whole year. Let's do it. Let's just go with it. On the other hand, if you have a growth mindset and somebody points out a flaw or somebody points out this, you want to grow and learn, and you want to improve the model. And so that's why we do, of course, always backtrack and reverse engineer, do everybody before too, so that the model is consistent all the way through to the best of the knowledge we have. But it's a thing that is a problem in general in baseball, which is we know that we're going to be wrong about some of the stuff we think we're right about right now. But we have to broadcast, especially within our organization, these are the things we know and we believe in them. We might know more later, but don't worry about that. This is the best we can do right now. But an anti-model approach might look at that and be like, well, the model is telling me what the best we know now, but I, in my brain, might be able to sort of poke some holes into it and find some ways through where I can even beat this model that's now on Fangraphs for everyone to see, right?
Right.
So if somebody comes up with an Ian Hamilton slider and there's nobody else that has an Ian Hamilton slider and Stuff Plus says it's not good, I can be like, well, I'm gonna go pick up Ian Hamilton. You know what I mean? So it's like, that might have been all a bunch of gobbledygook, but there's a struggle to sort of want to leave something in place that has value and then also to improve it.
You have to keep moving it, though. I think that's fundamentally important because nothing's perfect. We're trying to predict the future.
Exactly, yeah.
So you have to keep the anti-model approach is basically just trying to find cracks that are going to be included later. It's like,
exactly. Yeah.
I got there before the model did. Therefore, I got the good season for pennies on the dollar. The model caught up, and then you all paid full price later. Mm. So if I'm right about Matthew Liberatore and he's a fraction of the price of other starting pitchers that come up this year, then that's a win for me. And if the model sees, oh no, he did make some changes and this and that, this is all different. Great. I hope it gets it right. That's a better future for the collective.
By the way,
all of us.
He's up and I'm out.
He's up and you're out. Yes.
He has the best comp I can find in AAA to his numbers are basically a David Peterson with slightly more command.
Oh, well, that's going to be horrible, but you know what? That's what I need. I need that. I need there to be something else
Immediately
there.
throw $300 at him in Fab. Also, very interesting was in the regards to that last conversation was Brandon Williamson's debut
Yeah, he pitched really well.
in Colorado, where I was like, this guy, he was a LODEM, dude,
Oh
because
yeah.
he has like a 6.7 K9 in the minor leagues and like awful ERA, and the Stuff Plus didn't like him, had like an 85 Stuff Plus or something in the minor leagues. And he came up and shoved against the Rockies in Colorado. And I'm looking at his Stuff Plus, which is going to be wrong because he was in Colorado.
Right?
Um,
Yes, another important detail.
and it looks like if I'm just going to mentally give him some Stuff Plus because he was in Colorado, it looks like he has a good cutter and a good slider. I don't know if that's enough, man. It was an 82 Stuff Plus in cores. How much are you going to give him? You're going to give him 20 points of stuff?
Mm,
And then, despite him like having a new cutter in the minor leagues, it didn't show as great Stuff Plus. And then, just the poor strikeout rates in the minor leagues, poor strikeout minus walks. Like I'm still out. So I'm really interested to see what kind of fab people will drop on Liberatore and Williamson. Those are the LODEM guys this week.
yeah, well, Williamson, see, even within LODEM, I'm not taking a guy that has a 12% walk rate above double A. Like, that's a problem in Cincinnati, especially. You're going to put extra guys on the bases there.
Hmm.
Bad stuff is going to happen to you. So there's still some common sense. Now, I realize that the chapter meetings for LODEM, which, by the way, the next one is at the Chuck's Donuts in the parking lot in Redwood City. Donuts
Oh,
will be
they've got the
provided.
good
Bring your own
ube
cigarettes.
donuts. They've got good
Yeah.
ube donuts there.
Yeah. You could smoke, but you got to bring your own cigarettes. I'm not going to provide those for anybody. It's like, it's very analog. You still look back at different things and you're like, okay, well, the walk rate's crap. The home run rate's really bad. We know home run rates are noisy, but if you put both those things together, that's really bad. Oh, does he strike guys out? No, not really. He doesn't do that anymore. Okay.
You gotta have something. Even the LODEM has to have something to put your hang your
Right.
hat on.
Yeah, it's like are anti-hipsters not also hipsters though? Like, that's sort of what this is. Like, we're just looking for our own little niche to be cool and using old tools sometimes to
I
do
guess
it.
Liberatore, good ground ball rate, good strikeout rate, 30% strikeout rate.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like when you look at the Cardinals, defensively they have not been the same team this year that they've been in recent years. Not all of that could possibly be attributed to changes at the catcher position. I realize Nolan Gorman being in the field isn't necessarily a good thing for them, but if you had to predict it, wouldn't you predict that their defense going forward is probably better than it was for the first 40 games? So the team context is still probably pretty good for the Cardinals from a pitching perspective.
The
So you
park
have that.
complex is still pretty good.
Yep. And when you look at Liberatore, at least you get the big strikeout rate at AAA, and you get a walk rate you can live with, and a home run rate that's not bad. Again, back to analog, but by analog, there's stuff here, and he's trying to make the changes. This is the other part of our game. You
It's
can
a
be
big
bad
mix.
and
I mean,
bad
that's
and
something that's
bad.
always been tough for the model. Has been a big mix, right?
Yeah.
Because there's different ways you can port it together. You can sequence crazy. You can just keep them on their heels. When I look at the per pitch numbers for him, the slider is plus, but he uses a lot less than the curveball, which is also above average. And he locates the four seam fastball well, despite bad shape. And there are other pitchers who have just put the fastball in that skinny sliver that's in the strike zone, above the hitting zone, and below walks. If that it almost doesn't matter how good your fastball shape is if you can consistently hit that part. You know what I mean? And so, like the story you can tell for Liberatore is he hits the top of the zone with the four seam fastball. He throws the sinker to righties. He throws the four seam fastball high and tight to lefties. And he's got two different breaking balls that are plus. So there is a story you can tell, and that's actually a better story than I would say that I can tell for David Peterson, who's people are also asking me about. So I'll just run him down. He's got the plus slider. His fastball shape is worse. None of his location numbers are good. So you can't even be like, he's going to hit that sliver with the fastball. So I guess it might sound like damning with faint praise to say David Peterson with command, but if you did give David Peterson command, he would have a much better chance than he does now.
So I've got a fastball heat map on the screen. It's from this season, and I'm curious to know, would that fit in that sliver? Is that good enough as far as locating the fastball in a place that's... Who do you think it is?
Peterson?
It's not Peterson. It's someone we've talked about today. He doesn't throw very hard, and he really only throws one other pitch. The fastball slider guy that has exceeded expectations. Justin Steele.
Oh, just Steele.
Is that good?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, it's like middle's not really there.
Right.
I'm a little bit... Oh, is this like for lefties or righties?
It's for everybody. That's just where he throws them overall. So we should split them probably by handedness.
But I'm guessing that's in on the hands of lefties.
That should be in on the hands of righties based on the view.
Oh, on righties.
It's high enough, though? You're okay with that? That's consistently elevated enough? I
think it'd be better if it was up higher, but...
Yeah, especially at like 92, 93, where he tended to live.
Yeah. I think that little arm that's like higher, that I like that better.
The edge of the egg?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to be in the top of the griddle.
I think there is something to heat maps that that does not get captured by models very well, because models have to parse those heat maps into boxes. And so they're just like, it's very like, I've got to enforce my will on this heat map, right? Mm-hmm. And then we as people will look at that. Like sometimes I do heat map things where I'm like, oh, give me percentage of sliders in this middle zone or something, right? And then it doesn't actually parse right. And I'm like, it does not make sense. But if you like, for example, when we looked at Josh Lowe earlier, like there's a real difference to his contact rates high in the zone. If you look at the heat maps, it sort of pops. So I do think there's some value into heat. I mean, I know that like advanced scouts, for example, the way that baseball is played, advanced scouts are looking at heat maps.
Yeah, it makes sense. You want to know tendencies. You want to know where guys are locating, and if you can do something about that.
Tendencies don't have hard boundaries. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's not just like, oh, this box, and the people pitching aren't like, oh, I can hit that little box,
No, it's like up, in, down, whatever.
Exactly.
It's like more like D-pad directions.
Don't let it leak that way. Don't let it leak that way.
Yeah, it's more like that. I've got a few mailbag questions. We'll try to squeeze in as many as we can. One from Robert. Is anything wrong with Emmanuel Clase? Strikeouts have bottomed out. 14.8% strikeout rate so far this season for Clase. ERA approaching 3. He is on pace for another 40 save season so far. He's allowed 20 hits, though, in 21 and a third innings so far. He allowed just 43 in 72 and 2/3 last season. So do you see something actually wrong, or is this a case of, yeah, it's been about a quarter of a season, but for a reliever, that's still a really limited amount of work?
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong. I guess the only thing that's quote unquote wrong about him is that given his level of stuff, he's always allowed, a few more balls in play than you expect. And this year it's a little bit worse, but in terms of underlying numbers or anything, I don't really see anything wrong with what he's doing. So I would assume that some tiny part of it is the shift rules, and the other part of it is noise, and then the other part of it is some sort of long-term tendencies of allowing balls in play, so that he's always open to this possibility, right? There's always the chance that because he does not strike out like 45% of the people, like a lot of other top closers, that something like this would happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's filthy. It's nearly 100 with movement. He's down 1.5 miles per hour on the fastballs this season, but he's at 98.1. We're going to worry about that? Like, no.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's strange for sure, but I do think the shift rules might be something I didn't really think a lot about with Clase in particular, but he does allow more balls in play than you'd expect. So if you had to project it going forward, I mean, you comfortable buying into a return close to a strikeout per inning? Another part of this with Clase, by the way, he's always been good at keeping the ball in the park, still doing that. And he's always had really good control. Like a lot of closers that have electric stuff don't come into the league as young as he did with a low walk rate, and he's maintained that.
Yeah, I'd expect the ERA to go down. I know the projections are for him to continue about this, but they're never going to really project a guy to have a really low BABIP, or like, they're all saying, oh, 289, but his career BABIP is 252, So here, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Just close the tab I wanted to look at. Reopen. No, and then I just reopen all of them. Oh my God. I just want to reopen last close. Oh, good Lord. This is all falling apart. I just wanted to find that PPERA projection. Here it is. It's a little bit old. But Clase had a 252, actually.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong. He's got a clear grip on that job. It's one of the things
Not
that
exactly what you wanted, but it's also not terrible.
I think he's more likely to go to the 8 to 9 Ks per 9 range again the rest of the season than to stay down like this. Really, really tough guy to hit. So just seems like a smaller sample problem to me. Thanks a lot for that question. Let's get to one from Josh. Josh wonders if we should start to value Jacob deGrom like an elite reliever. I've managed to avoid the headache that is Jacob deGrom for the last several years, but he is endlessly fascinating to me. It got me thinking his elite results, but low innings totals sound a lot like a reliever. Sure enough, over the last couple of years, his numbers are remarkably similar to some of the top relievers in the league with no end in sight due to deGrom's injury issues. Should we start valuing him the same way we value elite relievers? Now, what I did is I took the 2022 Fangraphs auction calculator and just ran it to see where deGrom turned up, and he was just under $10, like right around that range. And he was right next to Paul Sewald, who was a committee leading closer. And I think he was within reach of Evan Phillips, who really didn't get a lot of saves last year. It was just kind of like the reliever that got wins, which kind of says, okay, $9-10. If deGrom ever gets treated like that in drafts, then it's a no-brainer because he still has within his range of outcomes stays healthier than a reliever. And even if it's 100 innings, that's more than any of those short relievers would throw. There's a higher win probability every time he takes the ball because of the way wins work. So you still have that. And then, of course, there's other ceiling beyond that. 140, 150. If those things can happen,
I mean, he almost throws like a reliever. I mean,
he throws like a reliever, max effort.
Yeah, and kind of fastball slider these days.
Yeah,
it's kind of a smart way to think about it. I think that we looked at Fangraphs depth charts, and like we said, well, even if he only throws 120 or 140 innings, he's going to be a top 10 starter, right? And so we figured, well, that seems like a number he can make. It's not a number he has made. In the last 3 years, So really we should have projected. I mean, just looking at innings pitched without any knowledge of anything else, we probably should have projected him this year for 80 innings. He could still get there. But if he gets to 80 innings, he will be more grouped with the elite relievers, I think.
You know what's hard about that, though, is that 2020 is misleading because he made 12 starts that year. You couldn't really make more. So it looks like another year where he was short. So you really would have to project them on 2 years of injuries, not 3 years of shortened workloads. Most
projections, kind of, they go 3 years back and they weight the last year heaviest.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think I'm guilty of it. I definitely saw more of the what would go right volume-wise for him, and it's still possible, even though it seems less likely with him on the IL right now. But if he comes back and he's healthy the rest of the season, then it ends up being the highest total he's had since 2019.
That's right. Yeah.
And then we go right back down the rabbit hole.
Still
again.
In the range of possibilities. He threw a light bullpen session.
Oh, well, that's great.
He's an elite reliever with catnip, surrounded by catnip.
Yeah. Right. If the market ever treats him like that, then that's probably a phenomenal time to have Jacob deGrom on all your rosters. The market probably won't treat him like that for like 2 more years. And if he does this for 2 more years,
him in the first 3 rounds.
Yes, I think Josh is on point. Josh, be smart. Don't look pie in the sky with deGrom. Look where you're looking right now. You're closer to right than I am with deGrom at this point. Thanks a lot for that email. We had a shallow league decisions question from David, kind of mentioning some of the names from earlier. You get these shallow leagues where you have to choose between the hot starter, the rookies that are up, all these things. You got to make these quick decisions because people are changing players constantly. But at what point do you actually start to confidently make decisions in a league that shallow? Is it different than a 12-team league and a 15-team league? And like, what do you need to see to believe in a player? And what do you need to see in a 10-team league to no longer believe in a player? Because the thresholds, to me, seem different, but it's hard to quantify.
Yeah, I think you have to be faster. Because you know that the replacement level is higher. So
you can afford to be wrong.
Make a mistake. You can just go get somebody that's like, let's say you have someone that, you know, you think that he's going to be worth 100% of this value, but he comes out and he's giving you 20% of the value, right? It's better to not keep nursing that along and keep putting in numbers into your league that are at 20 or 40% of that, when you can go to the wire and get 80% of that right now, right? And then let's say you're wrong and that guy goes back to 100. You missed that, but you've been getting 80s instead of the 20s while that guy was slumping. And then even if your 80 guy falls off, you can probably go and get another 80, right? So at some point, getting a string of 80 percenters instead of your 100% guy is worth it, rather than put in a whole month of 20%.
Right. I think this is the type of league where prospect clutching can be even more costly. I think the toughest player right now for me in a league like this is Gunnar Henderson. I think Henderson was mentioned in one of David's emails. Like, how long do you wait on Gunnar Henderson in a league that shallow where you could get so much more from that spot so easily? We're at 37 games in right now, 4 homers, 1 steal, a 184, 340, 351 line, so a bad slash line. The underlying numbers,
the minors that could come up, he could even be sent down.
They could.
I mean, this from Alek Thomas,
and it's not. It's even more important. Gunnar Henderson's ceiling is so much higher than Alek Thomas's. I think people can see it as truth a little easier with Henderson. If they send him down for 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever they send him down for, it doesn't mean that Gunnar Henderson won't be the player that you think he can be in the long run. Jared Kelenic, good example of things taking a little while, having a meandering sort of path to maybe reach the eventual baseline that you're looking for. The underlying numbers for Henderson are still very encouraging. He's not chasing pitches outside the zone. He's near a 10% barrel rate again. I think this is still a very good player in the long run, even though it's been a very tough start to the season.
How many 180s do you want to put up?
Yeah, how long do you want to deal with that? I think the other way to think about it is, if you haven't made this decision already, how far back would you have needed to see a turnaround to justify holding him? If you look back at the last 2 weeks and he was better, would that be enough? Or would 1 week be enough? I think that's the type of question people are often wrestling with.
Has he turned it around at all? Or is
not,
maybe his split's good?
No, you go back like 10 days, it's still a 30% K rate. I mean, it's a little more power in terms of extra base hits during that span, but I think in a shallow redraft league, I think you can justify it.
In May.
I think you can justify the drop on Henderson in those leagues, even though the long game is still very encouraging. You're playing a shorter game than that right now.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of my point too. It's like, okay, well, you look at his projections, and that's 100% Gunnar Henderson right now is 250, 15 homers and 7 steals. Are you telling me you can't get anybody that gives you most of that on the wire right now?
Right.
You just need to find somebody with a little power and a little bit of speed that's out on the wire. So, yeah, I do think you want to be more aggressive. It makes it harder. Like in my 12-team dynasty, it makes it a little bit hard because, it's a shallow league, but it's also a dynasty. So last year I nursed O'Neal Cruz along all year, and I kept getting offers, but I was like, I think this is going to be worth it. And before the injury, it looked like really this was worth it. But I also have nursed Alek Thomas along all year, and now it's looking like it may not have been worth it. So, and I guess the only caveat I'd have is, like, if you can put him on your bench and do something else and leave him on your bench for a while, like that's my process in shallower leagues. Is like, before I want to drop the guy, I put him on my bench. I wait 2 weeks. If I still want to drop the guy, I drop the guy.
Yeah, and I think that period is probably elapsed now with Henderson. But I think you could definitely look at the component skills across the board and just say, okay, this is actually what a bench is for. Like, if you want to hold a guy you can't use, you want a lot of reasons to believe in that player. We've seen power, we've seen speed, we've seen patience. We're not seeing it right now. This is a lineup on the rise. Those are all good things. So that might be the best case scenario. He might be good enough to hold, whereas a lot of other players in that format fall off the roster. And it's not about what you paid back on draft day as much as it's about what you're still seeing in the underlying numbers. That would be your reason for still buying into a better second half or a better next 4 months coming from Henderson. But the demotion does seem like it's very possible at this point because they've got plenty of alternatives and they're playing for now.
One last shout out on the way out. I mentioned my kids' playoff run in All House. They won 14-1 to get to the championship game. It's double elimination though, so they got to beat the champions twice.
Nice format.
But I mentioned them because last time I mentioned them, I've had a bunch of people reach out. So one was a cool story. A person working for a team right now was in All House. And he has one of his teammates is on that team, is working for this major league team with him now too. So we got two All House listeners, potentially former All House listeners, and then some other people reached out to other parents in the league saying, "I think Eno's kid is on your kid's team." So it's led to a bunch of fun conversations, and there's the All House benefactor really enjoyed the stories I told. The member of the All House family that has funded this team for many years about the story, and she really enjoyed it. So they get to play again Thursday night, and if they win, they get to play for all of the marbles. So that is your weekly or daily All House Little League Palo Alto Little League update.
We'll get to the we'll get the results next Monday on that episode. If you got questions for a future episode, be sure to send those our way. ratesandbarrels@gmail.com is the best email address to use for those. On Twitter, Eno's at Enosaris. I am at Derek Van Riper. If you want a subscription to The Athletic, it's $2 a month for the first year at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. It's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.